Hello everyone, Ethys here, and welcome to my lore tour of Void Ark and Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward patch 3.1. If you're not familiar with the series, what we essentially do here is we run through a dungeon whilst I spout off about the significance of everything we see to the world of Final Fantasy XIV, and more interestingly, at least to me, the various historical and cultural references which inspire them. While Cersei yells in the background. I'm not really one for intros though, so we're jumping right in, and hopefully Duty Finder is going to continue behaving itself today. So first enemy, Anzu, which is another name for the ancient Mesopotamian Zu, and Imdagud, a divine or demonic fire-breathing eagle with a lion's head, or a human-bird hybrid, depending on the depiction. So in various myths, it breathes fire, summons storms, it's considered an embodiment of the southern winds. The most memorable myth involving the Anzu involves him stealing the Tablet of Destinies, otherwise known as the Tupsamati, from the god Enlil, which basically grants the wielder omnipotence and sovereignty over the universe. And if the Tupsamati isn't a name with which you're familiar, it's the name of Louis Soir's staff, which we used in Before the Fall to entrap and destroy Nabriales. Larker, this is presumably referring to the lark, or let's see if I say this right, a Lordidae family, I believe, of birds that include skylarks and numerous other songbirds. So what are we doing here again? So the Sky Pirates, they're sick of collecting Allagan tomestones, so we're exploring a ghost ship that recently showed up in the Sea of Clouds, and it turns out to be, as most of us were speculating, a vessel constructed by the Miyachi on the eve of the 5th Umbral Calamity in order to escape and survive. I originally assumed that it was intended to enter the Void itself and weather the storm from there, but it seems now that the whole Void aesthetic was more that the Miyachi, they don't know how to build an airship any other way. They were potatoes after all. So the crew of Void mages had to sacrifice themselves in order to keep Skathak bound, and poor Karshi was left to operate the whole thing by himself. I thought that at least some of these coffins would be acting as stasis pods for the Miyachi citizens, but Koshi seems to think that he's the only one left alive. So if they were, they've presumably since been possessed by Voidsent themselves. Now, Hybodus. Hybodus was a shark that lived during the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. They grew to about 2 meters, or about 6.5 foot in length, so a lot smaller than you might expect for a prehistoric shark compared to the Megalodon, which fortunately for the Hybodus wasn't around that early. The Megalodon could get to about 60 feet in length, could probably swallow a Hybodus whole. To give you an idea, the average adult Hybodus would have been, I guess, a bit smaller than a modern bull shark. But they're notable for having 2 different types of teeth, one set for hooking and piercing and one set for crushing, so they could evidently eat pretty much anything. The other enemy we had back there was the Hydro Sprite. Well, Sprite is derived from the Latin spiritus, from which we also get spirit. Sprites or spriggans or fairies in folklore, they tend to be associated with various aspects of nature, hence here a water sprite. Now, while we're waiting for whoever this is to catch up, we're gonna have a look at the ceiling. We've got, it looks like a spinal column and a rib cage. So a question I raised a while ago regarding the structure of this place was the fact that traveling through the Void had warped it somehow, or whether it was built in this way to accommodate Void travel. It seems that the latter is the correct answer from what we've been told. All the Miyachi really had to power or innovate anything at all was Void magic. They hadn't developed Magitech or reinvigorated Allagan engineering like the Garlands, so the ship itself is both powered and glued together by Voidsent, which is how it gets this sort of half-organic look. I still like the idea I had before 3.1, where the ship and the passengers had been sort of warped or mutated by traveling through the Void. I think it would have been more unsettling and effective than just the whole Diablos thing, but hey, I don't write this stuff, and to be fair, I think this thread is so far pretty well written. It's a lot more interesting to me than Alexander is for now, for instance. Anyway, are we going? We're going. Excellent. Look at that. So first boss, Cetus is a Latinized name for the Greek Cetos. You can think of it as in the same category as the Kraken or the Leviathan in terms of being a pretty ambiguous mythological sea monster. Perseus and Heracles each fought one on their travels, and Poseidon sent one to destroy the city of a dude that claimed his daughter was hotter than any of the sea nymphs, including Poseidon's wife. Classic Greece, and that's a double entendre. I believe that Cetus was also the original form of the biblical story of Jonah being swallowed by a whale. So from when the Old Testament was first translated from Hebrew into Greek, it was Cetus. Then into Latin, it naturally took the name Cetus. And from the Latin, we get the order cetacean of aquatic mammals, including whales. So the English translation tends to end up with a boring old whale. There's also a Cetus constellation, but since it's not part of the zodiac, that particular reference probably isn't half as significant as, say, the name Cuhulainn is. That's all I've really got for the Cetus's inspiration. As for what it's doing here, I get the impression that it's not actually a void scent of any kind, nor really are any of the mobs that we faced so far in this beginning section. It's just a native creature to the Sea of Clouds. It's scavenging, possibly nesting here or something. Although, now that we've got another Hybotus here, I think it's worth noting. So I did a video a while ago about the primals and how, you know, they're not real. They're sort of myths given form, but they're all clearly inspired by something real. So the Leviathan is presumably inspired by okay, Cetus killed us. We Steve Owen now, guys. That's a bit of gallows humor for you. Thank you, Neko. Oh god, Neko Nia. Oh my god. Oh, the names of some people. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so the way that Leviathan was probably inspired by the giant sea serpents, and the way that I think Garuda was possibly a revolutionary among the Ixal that sort of helped them escape from Azus La. I think that it's quite likely that that Bismarck was inspired by either Cetus or a Hybotus or some other kind of giant flying sea monster. Although we haven't heard at all of Cetus or the Hybotus or anything else eating islands. So I think that's an interesting one. Although I think the implication with Bismarck is that he's consuming ether in that way by swallowing islands. I think that's it anyway. That's all we've really got of note for this fight, so I'm actually just going to skip ahead until the next pull. Alright, now some of you might be familiar with the concept of Teredo tunneling. I'm not going to pretend to understand, but I think it has something to do with allowing IPv4 to connect to v6. Either way, it's named for a saltwater mollusk, commonly known as a shipworm, which tunnels into wood, and particularly into the hulls of wooden ships, and make their homes there. So these freeloaders, I think, are quite appropriately named. Next, the Pagan knot, or the triquetra, is a Celtic symbol that you tend to see as a salient in a lot of ugly tramp stamps. I'll put a picture up for you when I edit this. It's presumably a religious symbol to old Celtic and Germanic cultures, and the original meaning seems unclear, but it shares a striking resemblance to Odin's Volknut symbol, and it's likely they have a common origin. The triquetra was absorbed and adapted by Christianity, as was common with so many of the cultures that it conquered and reformed, and has been used by them to symbolize the Holy Trinity. It appears on a lot of Irish crosses, and is used in the same kind of way as the Ethys, more commonly known as the Jesus fish. What does it do here? Well, the Volknut is often associated with Odin's power to bind minds and souls, and is involved in a lot of death rituals, so I suspect that that it may well be a part of the ritual magic which is used here to keep all the void scent bound. In which case, what we're doing here, destroying it, is probably just helping Diablos do his work for him. As for the Marble or the Marlborough, we're all pretty familiar with that by now. Mal as a prefix is obviously from Latin, means bad. Boros is related to breath, not so directly as you might think. Anyway, it's basically a very kind of rough and approximate, I should say, translation of bad breath, which is of course its signature attack from Latin. This room still seems to confuse the hell out of people. I know a lot of people have been like marking ABC because you know, you get the not spawning specific places, but I think it's really cool in here how the exhaust fans, they've got like hands, little clawed hands. It's creepy. So if you hadn't caught up with it, basically all the coffins we see around here are void sent. Well, they're holding void sent, they're entrapping void sent, and they're using them as batteries to power the airship, which confirms a question I was getting a little while ago about whether the void is composed of ether, whether void sent are composed of ether, and I think we can say pretty confidently that yes, in fact, they are ether as opposed to anti-ether or something else. Now here's an interesting one. Irminsul, if we're going to pull anytime soon, which we are, excellent. So Irminsul is an old Saxon idol, generally translated as Great Pillar, often depicted as a massive tree trunk, which I think makes pretty clear allusions to Yggdrasil. But a lot of modern scholars seem to think that Irmin is an epithet for Tyr, an Old Norse god who is worshipped as the head of the Germanic pantheon before Odin took cultural prominence in around the 5th century, and most of Tyr's legends and accomplishments were subsequently attributed to Odin instead after that time. Now Charlemagne made a point of destroying one of these Irminsul during the Saxon Wars, as it was a symbol of German paganism, and he was of course concerned with converting all of his annexed realm to Catholicism. Sawtooth might be a clue that it needs to be used to cut down the Irminsul. I'm not really sure. We've seen a lot of explicit references in here already to pagan symbols that European Christianity either assimilated or destroyed during the Middle Ages, and I think that conflict is significant as a theme. In Eorzea we think of people that draw upon the void for power in much the same way as Charlemagne would have thought of Germanic tribes drawing on symbols like the Irminsul, that it's dangerous, it's ignorant, and it's detrimental to the one true god, in our case, Cuhulainn. So while a lot of Roman and Greek cultural icons in history were respected during the Middle Ages as belonging somehow to the Christian cultural narrative, I guess you could say, it's interesting to me that the void sent seem to be made up of pagan, Saxon, and Celtic names and references that medieval Christians despised. Ark-Ked. Now the Ked are a family of obligate parasites like ticks and louse flies. I used to get a lot of ticks growing up from the Australian bushland. They're pretty horrible little bloodsuckers, but fortunately Lyme disease isn't really a thing in Australia. It seems to only occur in the northern hemisphere, which is pretty interesting. No idea why, but parasitism. It's another theme both in this fight and in the Void Ark generally, when we look at the kind of unnatural symbiotic relationship that the Void has with the Miyachi architecture and engineering here, and the way that it's tied together with all of these sickly vines. I really love the design of this place. It's fantastic. And we're going to jump ahead again to the next fight. I'm trying to trim these down a bit. All these lore tours have been, because I haven't really been editing them at all. They've been coming into like, 35-40 minutes, and I think it's better that we trim them down to the essential parts. So we're going to skip ahead. Okay, central conveyance units, and here is old mate Diablos. We know that he was until recently bound to the ruins of Amdapor, allegedly used against the Amdapori by the Miyachi, but I'm still not entirely convinced that the Amdapori didn't summon him themselves and try to contain him, thinking that they could fight fire with fire or something like that. Anyway, Diablos is the Latin name for the devil, so we have once again a direct association of paganism and Satan diametrically opposed to Heidel. The Blackguard is another interesting one here. The only other place in the Final Fantasy series that this name is used, as far as I know, is for an Albed enemy in 10.2. And for anyone who hasn't played Final Fantasy X, the Albed are essentially heretics to the dominant church of Yevon. Historically, the Blackguard was a term for Germanic mercenary regiments used during the 15th and the 16th centuries by various European factions. Charles V failed to pay them after they defeated the French in 1527, so naturally they went and sacked Rome and imprisoned the Pope, which weakened both the Vatican and the reputation of Charles V enough that Henry VIII of England decided they couldn't really do anything about his separation of the Church of England, so ultimately we have the Blackguard, largely to thank for the English Reformation. If you don't think that's pretty cool, I'm really not sure we can be friends. We're now moving to the forecastle, which probably looks like a gibberish word, but it's the proper term for what most people would call the forecastle of a ship. Props to Soken while I'm thinking of it for his work in here. The thing I love most about the Crystal Tower series, and it's the same in here honestly, is how we have two concurrent tracks for when we're in and out of combat. They're at appropriations of one another, and we switch seamlessly between them depending on whether we're in combat. It has this effect of the music and the gameplay. They sort of escalate at once, side by side, and as a music nerd, hearing it first in the Crystal Tower really, it just blew my mind. Of course, it doesn't happen for the boss battles, which I think is honestly kind of a shame. I'd like to hear at least for the first three bosses in here, rather than getting that generic Heavensward boss theme. So now we have, of course, one of my favorite stories. We've got Cuhulainn. I've talked about him in other places before, but usually in reference to his legendary spear, the Gay Bolg. So he's a hero from the Ulster cycle of Irish myth, and the descendant of the sun god Lu of the Daedanan, whom wielded Brionach against the evil Balor. I love his depictions in Final Fantasy, and he's depicted pretty similar in Ivalice, just without the tentacles. Because it's pretty ironic when juxtaposed with his namesake. He was originally outcast from Ulster because everyone thought he was too sexy and that he'd steal their wives and daughters, so they sent him to Dunscaith in northern Scotland to train with the legendary warrior woman Scathach, another name we see here in the Ark, hoping that she'll end up killing him. But he turns out to be pretty damn good. He grows up training under Scathach with another warrior we've heard of called Fedayad, who has skin which no weapon can pierce. Years later, Cuhulainn is forced to kill Fedayad in battle by literally shoving the Gay Bolg up his anus. Anyway, the way that we see him here as this hideous beast is probably in reference to the Riastrad or Warp Frenzy, which made him so effective. Essentially, at the first smell of blood, he would have a fit, his legs would turn backwards, one of his eyes would fall out, he would have sinews on his neck the size of children, his hair would stick up sharp enough to spike fruit on, and he would then kill everyone in sight. So Cuhulainn is in fact the inspiration for Dr. Jekyll, the Incredible Hulk, and fascinatingly, Super Saiyans. So there you go, Cuhulainn, a pagan Celtic hero and Void Sent, just like Fedayad, whom we last saw in Amdapor Keep, and his master Scathach, whom we shall encounter very soon. The ads in here, what are they? The Fubar. The term Fubar, as I understand it, it's a placeholder name used commonly in programming. Etymologically, the word Fu started appearing as a kind of nonsense word in the American culture in the 1930s. Is the foundation for not only Fubar, but the term Foo Fighter, or more commonly, fucking Foo Fighter, used by Allied pilots during World War II for unidentified aircraft or other phenomena, and later became the name of one of the greatest rock bands of all time. I'm also pretty sure that Fubar is what the medical droid is telling Padme when she's giving birth and dying at the end of Revenge of the Sith, which is, I don't know, is it meant to be funny? You guys know what I'm talking about? When there's the droid, it's got like those scoop hands, and Padme's giving birth, and it's going Fubar, Fubar. It sort of makes me feel like that that droid is dramatically underqualified, and Senator what's his name? Organa, Senator Organa's staff is probably the ones ultimately responsible for Padme's death, after all. Again, that's all I've really got for Cuhulainn, so unless anyone wants to hear me talk about Star Wars for the next 10 minutes, Star Wars hype, I'm not going to do that. We're going to skip ahead to the next boss. Now, Echidna, when most people hear that name, they think of the reasonably non-threatening Australian monotreme, and although they're spiky little bastards, they're probably the least dangerous fauna in the whole country. I haven't worked out the lyrics to this theme yet, but I swear to Raga that I hear the word platypus in there several times. Listen to it, I'm serious, you won't be able to unhear it. So anyway, the namesake for the Echidna is from Greek. Echidna was a primordial monster whose genealogy is contested by several different writers, but they all agree that she is basically something much older than the Olympian pantheon and the offspring of perhaps Styx or Tartarus, the god of that hell under hell realm of Tartarus, which imprisoned the Hecatonic Heroes and later Sisyphus. Either way, she's the mate of Typhon and the ancient mother of many of the most terrible and dangerous Greek monsters, including Orthrus and Kerberos, the Hydra, the Chimera, the Sphinx, the immortal Nemean lion, the Gorgon, Scylla, and various dragons. She's usually half nymph and half snake, so like a Lamia. But sometimes she has 100 snake heads, sometimes just a giant serpent with only a single human head. She lives alone in a cave, and sometimes in Tartarus itself, where she would take her victims to eat. She was immortal and terrorized the world, presumably for millennia, before she was finally killed in her sleep by Argos Panoptes, a champion of Hera. Oh, petrifaction. Let's see how many people get done by this. 1, 2, 3 at least in my party. Outstanding. Alright, let's see some ads. We have Dexter. We have Dexter and Sinister. Now, Dexter is Latin for right and Sinister for left. They're terms used historically in reference to coats of arms, referring to the left and right sections from the shield bearer's perspective. So when you look at a coat of arms, the left side from your perspective is the Dexter side, and the one considered the most important. When you get two coats of arms joining in the case of a marriage between two noble houses, you'll have the Dexter half of the husband's coat next to the Sinister half of the wife's, or in other cases the whole coat of arms of the husband's on the Dexter and the whole of the wife's on the Sinister. As for the significance here, well, we've talked about how Echidna is the mother of monsters. It seems here as well that she represents a kind of unity of different groups of Voidsent. She literally is a Voidsent coat of arms, and therefore presumably something very ancient and powerful. If we want to think of her in terms of the ranking order of Voidsent that the Charlayans seem to be so obsessed with, I think we'd put her in the first. I think we'd put pretty much every boss in here, and in the World of Darkness for that matter, into that first tier. And with that said, I suppose we may as well talk about Scathach here. As I mentioned earlier, she was a legendary Scottish warrior and the master of Cuhulainn and Fedayad. Well, she's the creature inside this massive coffin, and we learn that she basically serves as the primary generator for the entire Void Ark. What we have here is basically the Void equivalent of Bahamut and Dalamud. We see after this fight that Diablos frees her and returns her to the Void. Well, I speculated on State of the Realm shoutout that they're probably headed for Dun Scaith, the historical Scathach's Fortress of Shadows, and that the tower we were seeing in the preview shots of the Void Ark is likely one and the same. So I think that's where we'll end up sooner or later, if not in the second installment, then maybe in the third. But it might not be in the Void, it could be somewhere on the Yefayim Saltmoor, which was the seat of the Miachi capital to the northwest of Modona. You know, I guess we'll find out eventually. And again, that's all I've really got for Echidna. So thanks everyone for watching my Void tour. My Void tour. My lore tour of the Void Ark. I hope you found it as interesting as the previous installments. I'm super excited for the next one of these. I don't mean the next lore tour video. I mean the next installment of this this raid series. I'm not that narcissistic. Although with that said, I do definitely plan in the coming weeks to do a lore tour of St. Mosian's Arboretum and probably Faris Sirius as well, if I think that there's enough in there. I think there probably is. And excuse the truck rolling past behind me there. Excellent timing as always. Now, one thing that I am going to mention is I've got some more t-shirts on Teespring. I'll put up a link and a little picture for that here. So if you're trying to keep your nipples warm over the holiday season and you'd like to support the channel, then that would be a great way to do it. They're American Apparel t-shirts, so they're pretty good quality. They're nice. I'm going to get myself one. I'm going to get Viv one. It's probably going to be all the Christmas presents I get from most of my family as well. So check that out if you want to support the channel, and if not, that's fine. Just keep watching, subscribe, like the video if you like the video, or dislike it. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next lore tour, or sooner with whatever comes next. Take it easy.